So I'm sure you've noticed that everyone's talking about energy transition these days, right?
Right.
But what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic.
Is it like a complete switch? Ditching fossil fuels entirely, or is there something else going on?
Right.
That's exactly what we're diving into today.
Cool.
We're taking a close look at this article. It's called, hang on, Transia Energetica ou Diversificação Energética.
Okay.
It's by Armando Oscar Cavana Filho. And we're going to unpack some pretty surprising stuff.
Awesome.
You ready to rethink what you thought you knew about your iPhone?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, the article jumps right into this question. Like, are we really on the verge of, totally replacing fossil fuels? Or is it more about expanding our options, at least for now? The author, he seems to think it might be the latter.
Interesting. So if we're not just swapping one energy source for another, what does that shift even look like?
Well, he uses petroleum as a kind of a prime example, right?
Right.
We tend to think of it just as fuel, but it's way more complicated than that.
Right.
Only about 80% of petroleum actually ends up in our gas tanks.
Mm-hmm.
The other 15-20%, it becomes this like backbone of modern manufacturing.
Oh, okay.
Petrochemicals.
Petrochemicals. Yeah, I kind of remember that from like way back in chemistry class.
Sure.
But what does that actually mean, like in real life?
Think about like everyday stuff, plastics, polymers, synthetic fabrics,
Right.
all those materials, they start with these things called petroleum-based feedstocks.
Okay.
They reckon over 6,000 products come from them.
Wow, 6,000. I had no idea. So it's pretty much in like everything.
Pretty much, even your iPhone, the components inside,
Oh, wow.
they rely heavily on petrochemicals. So yeah, maybe it's easy to picture electric cars everywhere. But a world without plastics, that's a lot harder to imagine.
It really makes you think about all that stuff we use every day. It's not just about what's powering our cars. It's about like the materials that make up our entire world.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but let's go back to that 80%
Yeah.
that is used for fuel.
Right.
Is that part easier to like move away from?
It's definitely where we're seeing, the most progress. Electric vehicles are getting more and more popular, especially for like personal use.
Yeah, that's true.
But replacing every single petroleum-based fuel, that's a huge challenge.
Right. Even with all these electric cars popping up, there are still like roadblocks.
Totally.
Yeah.
For those big trucks and ships, Battery weight's a problem. Plus, you'd need a massive charging infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
And then there's planes. The limitations are like way bigger there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Try powering a jumbo jet with the batteries we have now.
Right?
It would be so heavy it wouldn't even be practical.
Yeah, good point.
And this is where it gets even more interesting, right? Because even those renewable technologies like solar panels and wind turbines, they still need materials that come from petroleum.
It's like we can't get away from it, can we? Even when we're trying to go green, we're still kind of hooked on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So where do all the other energy sources fit in? The article mentioned coal. What about that?
Yeah, so coal is mostly used for making electricity,
Okay.
which you'd think makes it easy to replace with renewables, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's not that straightforward.
Why not? What keeps it in the mix?
Well, coal has a few things going for it.
Right.
It's pretty cheap. There's tons of it around. And we've already got all the infrastructure for mining it, transporting it, burning it, switching to solar and wind on a huge scale. That'd need a massive investment in new stuff, not to mention dealing with the fact that they're not always available, like when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing.
Right. So even though it's a fossil fuel, it's the economics and logistics that keep coal hanging around. This whole diversification idea is making a lot more sense now. What about natural gas? Where does that fit into all of this?
Natural gas is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of energy. It can make electricity on its own,
Okay.
but it can also back up renewables when there's not enough sunlight or wind.
So it could like help smooth things out, bridge the gap between what we have now and a more renewable future.
Exactly. It provides that flexibility and stability that can help renewables grow. And sometimes natural gas with certain components can even be used to make petrochemicals.
Wow. It's even more versatile than I thought.
It is.
It really shows how everything's connected. So if we're not just swapping out fossil fuels for renewables, what does this like diversification actually look like in the real world?
The author talks about things like geothermal energy becoming more and more important.
Geothermal. It seems like we don't hear about that as much as solar or wind. What makes it a contender in this like diversified energy world?
It's actually becoming a pretty big deal, but kind of quietly. Geothermal uses the Earth's heat, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really reliable energy source. The weather doesn't mess with it like it does with solar or wind. And technology is improving all the time, making it usable in more places.
It's cool to see these lesser-known energy sources getting their chance to shine.
Hmm.
And then there's hydroelectricity, which has been around forever. But like you were saying earlier, it's facing its own problems.
Hydropower has been a reliable source for ages, but climate change is messing with water availability. It's a good reminder that even when we're diversifying, we got to think about how sustainable each source is in the long run.
It's not just about finding new sources, it's about reevaluating the ones we already have. It paints a really dynamic picture of how energy is emerging.
Totally. And let's not forget about solar and wind. They might not completely replace fossil fuels anytime soon,
Yeah.
but they're still a huge part of making our energy mix more diverse. The author even mentions nuclear energy, which is really efficient, but it comes with its own baggage in terms of building, running, and maintaining those plants.
It's amazing, right? All these different factors all kind of intertwined. We started off asking, are we ditching fossil fuels?
Hmm.
And we've ended up looking at this whole web of interconnected systems and choices. It's way more complicated and way more interesting than I thought.
Definitely. And what we're seeing, it's not just about changing energy sources. It's like a whole new way of thinking about how we use energy.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the big picture either. Our own choices, they actually make a difference.
Really? But doesn't it feel kind of pointless? What can one person do when the system's so huge?
That's a really good question. But think about it. What we're seeing is like a fundamental shift. And all of our individual choices, they actually add up.
So, if we all start making smarter choices about the energy we use, that could actually have a real impact.
Exactly. Every little decision, it all contributes. The cars we drive, how we power our homes, even the things we buy, it all sends a signal to the market about what kind of energy we want.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. It's like our collective actions, they actually have power.
They really do.
This deep dive has been incredible. Seriously, eye-opening. We went from this idea of a simple transition to understanding it's all about creating a more diverse and flexible energy system.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. And it's not over either.
That's true.
It's something we're shaping, all of us through the choices we make, through innovation, through new technology. It's really exciting, I think.
It is. So to all you deep divers out there, as you keep exploring the world of energy, here's something to think about. What role can we play in this shift towards a more diversified energy future? What can we do? What choices can we make? What technologies can we develop? And what kind of world could we create if we really harness this power of collective change? Keep those questions in mind as you dive deeper, and until next time, keep exploring.